do that. Oh,
Okay, we are live. Oh, but it does say 10 seconds, so maybe we were live and I didn't even know. Yeah, so as per usual, we'll make some nice little small talk, give time for people to join in. I'm going to pull it up on YouTube so that way I can reply to comments that come in.
And I need to mute this page.
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to do. It takes forever to load.
Yeah.
Let me put my phone away. There we go.
Great. Got it. And oh, yay. Hannah's already here. Much appreciated. Okay. So, friends, I'm really excited to talk about the Tenant of Wildfell Hall. I don't know about you. And ironically, I am drinking an adult beverage as we do this. And I was like, is that disrespectful to Anne? She wrote this whole novel to be like, temperance. And I'm like, sorry.
It's the rule of 2020.
Yeah. I just figured all my true feelings will really come out about this novel this way.
Yeah. I'm excited to talk about this.
Me too.
I have my tea because I need caffeine.
Your teacup is beautiful.
Thank you. I got it on sale for like $7 from David's Tea.
I love it.
Gosh.
Thank you.
I'm really just that like gold base is just stunning.
I love it.
I always need like emojis in the chat and they're never there. So then I have to like copy and paste them, but it's a whole process, you know?
Yeah. I think you can like right click and add emojis.
Can you?
Let me see. Are you talking about the YouTube chat? Like
I was doing it on StreamYard, but maybe.
Let's see.
Oh yeah, there is a little emoji guy in the corner of YouTube. I should reply there. Oh, too late. And done. All right.
Yeah. I agree, Julia. Your hair looks amazing.
Thank you. I bought a waver, which is just like the 3 and 2 things, and it just like clamps your hair, you know? And so I was like, want to be fancy. I don't know. I'm looking for an excuse to use it because we don't go anywhere, you know?
Yes. Dress up for you, Julia.
Exactly.
Exactly. This is for me. I don't know if you guys can ever hear. I live on like the noisiest neighborhood street that's ever existed. We get like motorcycles going by, and every time we're live, I'm bound to hear like 3 of them.
It's when the motorcycle party starts.
Yeah. They're like, oh good, it's time. Julia's just gone live. They're like literally on my YouTube channel. They're like, rev them up, boys.
Move out.
Live.
All right, it's 5:03. So we can slowly start to ease into things. So obviously we're talking about The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Brontë, which is our 3rd and I guess final for now Brontë novel. So congratulations to us. We did it. We made it through. And just for clarity's sake and trigger warning's sake, this book does deal with alcoholism and domestic abuse and some heavier topics, which I don't think will be discussed too much in the initial spoiler-free section that we're going to start with, but will definitely come up later. So if those topics make you uncomfortable, know yourself. We're not going to be offended if you need to leave. But yes, we're going to go into, I guess, since this is a less known Brontë novel, it might just be beneficial to say The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is about a woman who is a widow who moves to town, and everyone's like, ooh, who's this lady? What's her deal? And they're starting lots of rumors about her, but there's a local man who's like falling in love with her, and he doesn't believe these rumors and wants to find out the truth. And it's kind of the essence, right?
Yeah.
All right, so friends, let's just start as we normally would. Kind of tell me your overall experience. What did you know already going into this book? What's your rating now that you've read it? Very curious. Whoever would like to start, take it
Kara, would
away.
you like to start?
Sure. So I had not read this book before, and I knew very little about it. I kind of I remember a few people talking about it, and it sounded like something I would be interested in. And I knew that it was kind of one of the things I remember people saying about it is that it did deal with a lot of heavy kind of social themes. But I didn't really know what that was. And I kind of kept it that way because I wanted to go in not really knowing what it was about. And then I remember Julia mentioned in one of our previous live shows that she had seen something that was this is sometimes considered one of the first feminist novels. And I'm like, that sounds great. I love that. But yeah, I knew very little about the story. I didn't know much about Anne Brontë herself. I don't think I've ever read anything from her before. So I kind of went in with a basically clean slate on this one, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I really liked the characters and the writing. I think the way this book handles themes is really well done, and we'll obviously get more into that in the spoiler section. But I thought it was very effective at what it was doing while also being an engaging story. I really liked some of the humor. That surprised me that some of the writing was very funny. It reminded me a tiny bit of Austen, although I hate that people compare the Brontes and Austens constantly just because they're both they're women writing at roughly the same era. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Really the only thing that I didn't love as much is there's a part in the middle that kind of I think went on a little longer than it needed to, but at the same time I see why it was there. And what its purpose was and everything. But yeah, enjoyment wise and I think quality wise, I think this was a really good book. Reading wise, it's my favorite of the 3 Brontë novels we have read. Which I'm one of those weirdos who actually likes Wuthering Heights. But actually this is my favorite Brontë that I've read so far. So yeah, really enjoyed it.
Taylor, before you give your piece, I will say we will be coming back to Jane Austen. So just
Cool.
pin that for now because we will be talking about her later. Taylor,
Awesome.
let us have it.
So I did like this book, and I think if you were to ask me my rating right now, it would be about a 3.5 star thing. And I think part of that is that for me, the pacing in the beginning and the end were kind of slow. And the only part I really genuinely cared about was the middle. I thought the middle was so well written. It was so interesting. Just seeing the progression of our main character and basically the highs and lows of that middle part completely captivated me. The beginning was incredibly slow. And the end I was like, wrap it up. We're done here. But I will say the writing was very interesting, and I really liked the protagonist. I thought she was incredibly compelling, and if I didn't love the character of Jane Eyre so much, she would be my favorite of the 3 main characters that we've read so far. But yeah, I liked it. I don't think I loved it.
A fair assessment. Yeah, similarly, I didn't know anything about the plot of this as we were going into it. I was just like, I know it's written by the sister of these other authors that I read. And that was it. I read a little bit of Anne's poetry because it was just in a collection of all 3 of the Brontë sisters' poetry. And I think I might have said this previously in another one of our live shows, but I liked Anne's poems best. So I was very hopeful for this. And it did not disappoint me. I gave it 4.4 stars because I'm annoying, but it's 4.5 stars, and yeah, I really liked it. I agree. My main issue was with the pacing. The pacing was slow in some parts for me. I think more so in the middle.
Yeah.
But if the middle had been the beginning, then I wouldn't have minded being as slow as it was, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
To you guys who have read it, maybe it doesn't make sense. But I did really like it. I think Anne will prove to be my favorite of the Brontë sisters, and I look forward at some point in my free time to reading Agnes Grey because I want more. All right, so since we've already kind of touched on it a little bit, I would love to know, how would you guys compare this to the more popular Brontë novels? Obviously, the two that we've already read definitely come to mind. And also, if you think at all that it fits into the Gothic genre that her sisters definitely were a huge part of. Taylor, we can start with you this time.
Okay. So the first part of the question, sorry, was that like, how does it compare to the Brontes other novel?
Yeah, just okay. Like compare and contrast the Brontes, whatever that means to you.
I will say, with all of the Brontë books, I think all of them do have some pacing issues. They do like to take their time with the story, and sometimes it pays off, and sometimes it does not. I will say, I thought this one, I didn't like it as much as Jane Eyre, and part of that is probably nostalgia. I just love Jane Eyre, and I thought the plot was a little bit more interesting to me. I liked it more than Wuthering Heights, and I think part of that was just that there was more hope in it than Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is pretty bleak from beginning to end, but this one I liked that there was hope in it throughout, like even at the lowest points. It was like, okay, I kind of see what's happening here, and I think things are going to be okay. Fingers crossed. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Do you think this fits in the Gothic genre, like her sister's books?
I would probably say no, just because I feel like it's missing a lot of the Gothic elements other than Wildfell Hall, which when it was first described seemed a little bit like it was going to be the start of a Gothic thing. I think it's like half broken down and kind of old, and you have this mysterious widow like moving in. So it sort of has a sort of Gothic setup, but at the end of the day, it's very much rooted in reality and, very, I guess, true to life, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I personally wouldn't consider it a Gothic novel, though there might be some Gothic influences in it.
Kara?
Yeah. So I mentioned kind of before that, like, I do think this is definitely my favorite of the three if I just look at my rating. Because I did not like Jane Eyre, as you guys might remember. I kind of hated that book. So I was really glad that I enjoyed this one so much. And I will say, like, Wuthering Heights, I have like a stronger emotional reaction to that one than this one, I think. But I don't think that's necessarily because this book wasn't done as well. I just think like there's something about the way that Emily Brontë writes that is very in touch with like the emotional like depth of what's going on. Whereas I think Anne Brontë was kind of, in my opinion, I think she was kind of deliberately trying to like make the emotions more realistic. And which like I think worked for this book really well. And that kind of like goes into the second part of your question, Julia, because I kind of feel like this is like the main character or the main female character like trying to get out of a Gothic novel. So in a way, I feel like it does kind of fit into that tradition, but it subverts it a little bit. Like it feels to me like Anne Brontë was actually engaging with some of these really like dark topics that Gothic novels would kind of like sensationalize. Because like for me, like even Jane Eyre, which has like is very Gothic, it has like a lot of like very common Gothic tropes. I don't feel like it really rang true to me, like the like emotional like payoff from some of those. Whereas with Tenant of Wildfell Hall, I feel like it really did. So yeah, I feel like it kind of it's in conversation with Gothic trope, but it doesn't like play them straight, and I kind of like that. I like that Anne Brontë is like subverting those by being like, this would be really messed up in real life, and I'm going to show you why.
Yeah, I love what both of you said actually, because that is ringing very true with. I was reading a lot of critique, both like in period and modern critique of Tenant, because I just love it. It's very interesting to me. And that's funny because one of the things that you both brought up was like the house itself, Wildfell Hall. And there was one critique that had said like, it seems like it would be, you're like at this new, mysterious, old, dilapidated house. But in the end, like there's nothing spooky about it. It's just like, yeah, it's this old house she lives in. So it's not really fitting in that Gothic trope at all. It's just like, no, it just looked that way. Sorry.
Yeah. A Gothic bait and switch.
Yes. And also that Anne apparently did not like the whole like romantic movement of writing. And so she was very purposefully trying to be like, these are serious topics and I'm going to address them as such. Thank you very much. Which, I mean, you can definitely tell. Yeah, I love her too. But like weirdly, that was one of the things, mostly historically, that like people had critiqued the book for, was like how serious the topics were. And I'm like, I get that she's like treating them very seriously, which is good to me. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know, is yelling at your wife any worse than like locking your wife in an attic? To me, one of those seems a little bit worse, but we don't think of it as such. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to see that point of view.
And you might be intending to get into this later, so like stop me if you have other plans. But like related to the critique aspect, like when my edition has some like kind of biographical notes and like details in the back, and I was like, oh, interesting. I don't know much about Anne Brontë. I'm gonna read those. And I am so upset because Tenant of Wildfell Hall was like an immediate bestseller. Like it sold out in like a month or something. And Anne died before her sister Charlotte, and Charlotte said, no, we're not going to republish this. This book should never have been published. It does not, how does she say it? Like, doesn't, it's not like who my sister was or something. Like, she was worried it would like reflect poorly on her as a person. And I'm like, but she's saying the bad things are bad. Like, I don't understand. So I'm very upset on Anne Bronte's behalf, despite her being dead for a few hundred years. I'm like, this is an outrage.
The part of me that wants to like look into things and create like gossip and mess is like, was Charlotte jealous? Is that why? Family drama?
Yeah. It occurred to me.
There's a lot of speculation about that. If you guys go hunting online, there's like a lot of people being like, yeah, why didn't she want it republished? So very much like you were saying. And I took, Kara, I told you this, I took a quiz that was like, what Brontë sister are you? And I got Anne, but I loved this part. And I just wanted to read this like from the little, you know, when they like give you a little paragraph about your answer. It's like, you tend to be perceived as a goody two-shoes. Why? Because you refuse to romanticize drunken, abusive men. Like, oh no, how dare I?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of that like Hark a Vagrant comic. I don't know if you remember that dude watching with the Brontes.
Yes, those are so good. I love Kate Beaton. Okay, what else did I write in my notes? Oh, well, we already mentioned this, but didn't really get into it. So Tenant is considered to be, by many, one of the first feminist novels. Do you agree? Why or why not?
Kara, would you like to go first?
Sure. I definitely agree. I think it's like a really effective feminist novel because like it feels, I'm trying to do this without spoilers, but like it feels very immediate what you're experiencing with Helen. And it was like very stressful at some parts. And I think even though like the double frame narrative could be kind of like, why is this here? I think part of the way it was structured helped you kind of like, again, spoilers, like it helped you see that things would probably work out a certain way, you know, because you had that benefit. But yeah, I definitely think this is a feminist novel. I think like, I think it was Julia who first like said like 25 pages in and she's like raging against the patriarchy, and it's like, we love it. Like it's great. Like even before you get to the middle chunk, which is like really where she like digs into like, these are the terrible things that can happen to women. This is why the system of marriage, like bartering, is so messed up. Like even before that, like the way that Helen's like the way that she raises her son, everybody's like, whoa, what are you trying to make him do? Like women? And she's like, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think like it's a very strong feminist novel, and it's like also a really compelling story, I feel like. And well, okay, there's part I have to wait for the spoiler section, so I won't say that just yet. But yeah, like I do think it definitely should be considered a feminist novel, and I personally feel like that's probably why critics didn't like a lot of it. Yeah, also because apparently it was published together with Wuthering Heights, and like all the critics hated Wuthering Heights so much that they like complained about that one and ignored Anne Bronte's novel. Like it was very weird. Like poor Anne, it's like so many things conspired against this book, even though it was like very successful with the public. But yeah, anyway, that's like a very rambling way of saying yes, I think it's feminist.
I'm like just on a side note, I'm shocked that they like paired Wuthering Heights with Tenant, because tonally they're just so different.
Yeah.
But I would also consider this to be like an early feminist novel. I think, without getting into spoilers, like a lot of the stuff that happens and a lot of the decisions Helen makes are very like almost modern, honestly.
Yeah.
And just a lot of the things that it discusses, well, without actually like naming them, things like gaslighting and, you know, like the difficulties of getting out of a situation, a lot of which are like almost like modern, or like this idea like, well, if you love someone hard enough or if you pray hard enough, things can change, but you know, that's not always the case. And I think I just love the way it goes into how women were treated at the time, what they were expected to put up with in marriage, and how difficult it is for them to like get out of a bad situation. And the fact that you have a main character who's like very strong in herself, I thought was really great. So I would also consider this to be an early feminist novel.
Yeah. I wonder if like if critics were like so upset because they're like, if girls start listening to you about not marrying people they can't respect, society will collapse. Like
I wonder if it was kind of like an Ibsen thing, like with A Doll's House. Because
oh yeah,
that's what that's what I was thinking of a lot while reading it.
For sure.
It's a good comparison. Yeah, obviously, I totally agree. I think it's a super feminist novel, and I think that's a huge reason about why I love it so much. What was I going to say? Oh, another moment that I loved that really like made me go, this is a feminist novel, was like even outside of Helen, who I think is such a strong character, and we're going to talk about her more in a second, so just buckle up. But there's a scene with Rose, Gilbert's sister, where she's like talking to her mom, and she's like, oh, how should I prepare this? And she's like, oh, do it like this. This is how your brothers like it. But like, what about how I like it? And it's just that realization of like, wait, we do all of this stuff to accommodate men and just like, yeah, that's the way we do it. Don't even consider your own thoughts on things. Like, it really like hit me in that moment. I was like, wow, she like really was going for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that again was in like within the first 100 pages of the book. And I was like, all right, thank you, Anne.
Yeah.
So kind of not too spoilery, but just to talk about themes a little bit. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is obviously much more moralistic than her sister's novels that we've read. And what kind of themes in this book do you notice that kind of give evidence to that in contrast from her sisters, I guess, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I honestly think there's a lot in terms of the theme of like how we show love and how we give love. Just thinking of Jane Eyre, which is a sort of, if like I might leave him, but if I love him hard enough, or if I pray hard enough, or if some bad thing accidentally happens to him, he can change. Whereas in The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, it's like, it doesn't matter what you do. Some people just aren't going to change, and you need to take care of yourself in that situation. Love isn't always enough. Oftentimes, you know, I think that's another big thing in that book. Love is not always enough. And, you know, you have to be confident in yourself as well to know when to get yourself out of some bad situations.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. And I feel like we see that where Helen is like advising, I think it was Esther, I can't remember which character it was, but she was basically saying like, I didn't listen to people. You need to listen to me. I don't want this to happen to you. And I thought it was really interesting too, how she wasn't saying like, because Esther was saying that like she didn't love the person that her parents wanted her to marry, and Helen was like, you should love him, and she's like, but that's not enough. Like you also need to like know who he is as a person, and like think about, like she does say you need to like listen to other people's opinions on him and like take advice and everything. And I thought that really stood out to me as like she wasn't saying like learn from my mistakes and like follow who your parents want you to marry, but she was also not saying like love fixes it all and just just find someone who you can love. I think those two things were different. I lost what I was saying there. But yeah, so like that was something that really stood out to me, is kind of this like middle road idea of like marriage, and like she's like, use your brain. Like not that she's blaming the women that these things happen to, but I thought that was like very unusual to kind of be like midway between practical and romantic. And like as for other themes, like I mean, besides like the content warnings that we mentioned at the beginning, those were obviously a big part of the book. But something else that struck me is something I think, Julia, you kind of alluded to, where like just because they weren't calling it a certain thing, it's like gaslighting has been around since before that term was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this book is a really great example of how like people didn't start suffering from these things when we had a name for them. Like they have always been around, and writers have always known about them. Like people in general have always known about them. So that was another thing I noticed, is just like, to me, what a clear example this book is of like, yeah, it's not like a modern invention. Like women have known that they were taken advantage of in these ways. It's not like when the feminist movement started, women woke up and they're like, wait a second, we're people. So yeah.
Very true. Yeah, because you'll see that online when people will be like, well, if everyone is so triggered by things, why didn't we know about this? It's like, well, we did. You just called it hysteria and said, like, lock them away.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Just because it didn't have the same name didn't mean these issues weren't existing.
Yeah.
We know more about them and we can help them.
It's like how like before doctors ever knew what postpartum depression was, authors were writing about like women who had children and who were like, oh, she has depressive spirits or something. And it's like, that's clearly postpartum depression, and like just they didn't have a name for it.
Yeah. It's funny. It's almost like the more we learn about things, the more words we have for them.
I think you're onto something, Taylor.
I love that. And kind of on that same note of like the moral themes of the story and kind of the realism, one of the biggest critiques that I've seen, not just from like literary people, but just like general book reviews, like on Goodreads and stuff, one of the biggest critiques is about Helen being a character who is too perfect, and she's criticized I know that was my reaction too, for being too perfect. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with that critique? Because I don't.
Go for it, Taylor.
I do not agree with that critique at all. I think she's definitely smarter than a lot of the people around her, but you clearly see like in like the sort of like flashback diary scene, she's very like high-spirited and impulsive and immature, and then she does mature eventually, but I think she sort of has a tendency towards naivete and sort of like believing the best in people, and she does grow from that, but I also wouldn't say that she's perfect. She's just a really good person who grows smarter by the end of the book, and is always, I don't know, I feel like sometimes people think that just means they're perfect, but I never thought that was her being perfect. That was just her maturing.
Yeah. And like kind of like this idea that if a character or like a person has like a strong moral compass, then it's like, oh, they're too perfect. And it's like, that doesn't mean that you don't make mistakes. Like,
yeah.
I also disagree with that assessment that she was too perfect. I'm surprised that was even like a criticism. Like it didn't even occur to me. Because I feel like the book did a really great job of like showing that she was fallible, and like she was kind of overly optimistic about certain things, or it was kind of funny that like she would say that she wasn't that good of a person, and it's like, I think you are. Like I think she is like a very good person. She just holds herself to this really high standard. But yeah, I thought she was very believably flawed, but she was still like somebody who did the right thing. Like, and I think those things can exist. And I think we get used to, like, in books, it's like if you aren't like a questionably moral character, that means you're too perfect. And it's like you can have internal conflict and still be a good person.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't think like that at all about her.
I knew I could count on you guys. Yeah, this like made me mad when I first read it. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, it's, yeah, just because a character isn't morally gray doesn't make them boring. It doesn't make them perfect. Like, Helen can be pious and she can be caring of others, even those who do her harm. And she can make mistakes and she can rush into things or not stand up for herself. And, you know, like all these things that are very human. And it just like kind of boggled my mind that I was like, I can see that, you know, you might interpret her as like being a goody two shoes, but that doesn't make her a perfect person or character. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I also was looking at kind of like an overview of what critics at the time thought of this book, and it was really interesting to me because, and like I don't think I read as much about it as you did, Julia, but I just was kind of curious to see what people thought. And a lot of the reviews that were very negative were like, "This is morally disgusting. How could you show this in a book?" And I think it's very interesting that now the problem people have is the opposite. And like even before, like Julia, you mentioned that people think Helen is too perfect. When I was reading about like contemporary critics reviewing the book, it occurred to me, I was like, I feel like nowadays people would say this book is too moralistic. And it's just like very frustrating that it's like like the same book has like these very opposite reactions from people as to like how moral it is. And like, yeah, just interesting.
Yeah.
Very true. Okay, this will probably be our last thing before we go into spoilers. In fact, it might just kind of go right into spoilers, honestly, mid-question. So we'll let everyone know. But, oh no, wait, I'll ask this first. Okay, do you have a favorite quote that you want to share? I think out of context quotes are not spoilers, so.
Okay.
Somebody else should go first while I find mine.
I do have one. Thank you, Goodreads, for always having them available when I read an audiobook. So this is kind of like what we were discussing with Marry for Love, but marry smart.
Mm-hmm.
So when I tell you not to marry without love, I do not advise you to marry for love alone. There are many, many other things to be considered. Keep both heart and hand in your own possession, till you see good reason to part with them. And if such an occasion should never present itself, comfort your mind with this reflection, that though in single life your joys may not be very many, your sorrows at least will not be more than you can bear. Marriage may change your circumstances for the better, but in my private opinion, it is far more likely to produce a contrary result. So,
yeah. That's a good one.
Preach.
I'm gonna do what Julia says she did for Jane Eyre, which is just like mention a general scene. But this is only like 24 pages into my edition, where Helen and Gilbert are like having that argument, and this is at the point where like everybody is giving her a hard time for like caring about her son, basically, and so she just like goes off on him. And because their argument is like, oh, but he's got to be a man, he has to like see temptation and then turn it down, and she's like, that's stupid. And like, that whole scene where she's like, oh, are you saying then that women should be exposed to bad things? And he's like, oh my god, no. She's like, so are you saying they're naturally like morally worse? And he's like, no. And she's like, that's what you're implying. And she just like destroys him logically, and I adore it. Like, it's just so good. Like, this is like all of this basically is her just like, you're an idiot and I'm gonna explain it to you.
Gilbert destroyed with facts and logic.
Yeah.
I agree. That's like my favorite scene in the whole book. That was the moment where I was like, oh, this book's good, huh? Like, okay.
You're like, me and Anne Brontë are gonna get along.
Yeah. Oh, and unrelated to my quote, but related to that scene, I learned, apparently, in my research, that the Oxford English Dictionary credits Anne Brontë in this novel to the first use of the word cardboard, and also the saying tied to your apron strings. So our girl's out here like being Shakespeare, coming up with things. Love that for her.
Love it.
Yeah. As for a quote, I saved a couple. Oh, I think I like this one. This is actually like a part of a whole thing, but this is just the end of what she said. No generous mind delights to oppress the weak, but rather to cherish and protect. And I liked that. Like, yeah. Don't hurt people. That's bad.
and also that it's like impossible to express love that way. Like,
yeah,
seems pretty simple.
You would think. Okay, so we're going to start getting into characters a little bit. We might be able to just address our favorite character without spoilers, but I think after that, it's definitely going to get into spoiler territory. So friends who were listening and maybe plan on reading this in the future, we kindly bid you adieu. But if you want to stay, we love that too. So yeah, favorite character. What do we think, friends?
Well, my favorite character is Helen. Love her.
Yeah.
Are
we all going to say Helen? She's the best.
Oh, she's great. Like
Helen, I liked her son. He was cute. And the dog, Sancho.
Sancho.
He was barely a character. I loved all the dogs in this book.
Yeah.
Helen.
I think like
bonus.
I think like Helen kind of eclipsed the other ones, but I will say like I was pleasantly surprised by Gilbert, just because like he's kind of a dick sometimes, but I think also the fact that he is telling this story kind of in hindsight, it allows him to kind of like unobtrusively be like, yeah, that was dumb that I did that, or that I assumed that. Like he's like a hot-headed romantic young 20-something, or like even younger than that, I don't remember, so like I can forgive it a little bit. And I was pleasantly surprised at how like still engaged I was with him. And I also like, so Julia, the part you mentioned where Rose is like, well, why shouldn't I do it how we like it, like just because he's a boy. And I really liked that after that, like when Gilbert is like ending the letter to his friend, he's like, is that true? Like, is that like how low that your wife's standards are, that you just like enjoy the fact that she does things for you or something? So the fact that Gilbert was like kind of aware about some of this like sexist BS, I think like was a strong point in his favor. Yeah. But yeah, actually there were like quite a few characters where I was like pleasantly surprised by, like Lowborough. I like was very proud of him. I did not expect. And even I can't remember her name, but Helen's friend,
Mildred.
Mildred.
Or is her sister? Yeah.
I was very invested in what happened to her. Like so I thought like she was really good as well. So yeah, like just characters all around I think were well done. But yeah, Helen is great.
Yeah, I'm in strong agreement. I just love my girl Helen so much. I mean, she kind of it would be like it was too obvious. Like she walked in and she's like, "Hi, I'm a mom," and I was like, "You're a mom?" And then she's like, "Hi, I'm a feminist," and I was like, "You're a feminist?" And the rest was history. Like it doesn't take much.
I almost messaged you when I started reading, when I got like further in, because I was like, no wonder Julia loves this. It's a theme of motherhood.
My favorite. Yeah. So I love her so much. And I just think like Helen's interactions with like this huge variety of characters, like there's no one that she interacts with that isn't interesting to me, like, and she's like always true to herself, but like there's different facets of her that come out talking to different people, and I just adore her. But I do agree, I wasn't mad at Gilbert. I kind of like the guy, and I learned online that some people don't, which I have a question about. We'll get there. But yeah, Helen's definitely my fave. But little Arthur Jr. is a cutie. We like him too. So naturally, I'm going to ask, who was your least favorite character? I wonder if we'll have the same answer for this one too. I don't know.
Well,
I mean,
count down and say it.
yes.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Arthur,
Arthur.
Yeah.
He's garbage.
trash.
The worst.
Yeah, I think we're allowed to go into spoilers now. I already gave the warning, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Just
Ugh,
scum.
I hate
awful.
them.
I think at one point when I was messaging Julia because I knew she had finished already, I said something like, I want to push him and Lady Lovero out separate windows. Like they just yeah, but I hated him like a lot more, although I do think that like she was just such a great example of like women being complicit in like treating other women like shit.
Mhm.
But yeah, like Helen's husband is just like the scum of the earth. Like just
He's awful. Like, at the beginning during their courtship, I was like, girl, he's shady.
I know. even when he was supposed to seem charming, everything he was doing, I was like, red flag, red flag. Oh my gosh, like you can't just be like, well, say you love me. If I said I love you, you love me too, right? Just say it. It's fine.
Yeah.
And then she's like, okay, fine, I love you. And then he's like, so I'm gonna kiss you now. And it's like, chill out, please.
And like right at the first part where they're introduced, because like what we get with Helen before, it's like I think 95% sure that something in her backstory is related to her husband, like treating her terribly. So like we kind of knew that was coming, but when she meets Arthur for the first time, it was like I couldn't figure out at first if he was going to be like the false lead that like makes her realize like, oh, I like flirting, this is fun, and then she like gets taken advantage of by someone terrible. But yeah, it's like really quick after that I'm like, oh, this is get out of there.
Yeah. I think like he was already sketchy, but with the moment when he first like withheld affection from her, I was like, red flag. I know you're young, but please, you need. I mean, people were telling her that he was shady, but like,
I know.
it was stressful.
I felt so bad for her aunt, who's just like, sweetie, no. And she's like, I can do this. Just trust me. And it's like, no, you really can't.
Yeah.
I know. And like her aunt was trying to marry her off to somebody that she didn't like, but at the same time, it's like, I do think she has your best interests at heart. And she's right. Arthur is like sketchy AF. Yeah. Like, do not trust him.
My favorite, sorry, just because you were talking about the aunt trying to marry her off to whoever. I think one of the funniest things in this book was the one guy, I forget what his like title was, but it was just like Lord or Mr. or whatever. But his name was like Borum, and then she spelled it phonetically like Borum, and I was like, oh my god, it's so funny.
That wasn't something I got from like the audiobook. So when I was like reminding myself of the characters, I was like, oh, it's spelled like Borum. Yeah. Oh, I get it now.
That's funny.
That's really good.
Also, like something else about the like her husband and just like the abuse part of the book. Something that I thought was really interesting is that this book does not have like any, at least that I remember, it doesn't have any physical violence in it. I think there's a couple places. Oh, is there one?
There's at least one part where like he's hitting the dog or hurting the dog, and he like throws something at the dog, and he hits her too.
Yes, you're right.
That's right. He might not have intended to hurt her, but it still didn't feel like it was entirely an accident, or he didn't feel too bad about it.
Also, like the abusing animals is also a big red flag for like, a human being, for a person, and so like there was, I think, very little physical violence in it, and I thought that was still really effective because, for one thing, like abuse does not have to be physical for it to be like debilitating. And also there was like, for me at least, there was the constant fear that he was going to physically abuse her or her kid. And like, that's why, even though the frame narrative was like kind of unnecessary at points, I'm like, I'm glad that we know that her and baby Arthur both get out okay. Like I could not handle this if we didn't know that.
Yeah.
Truly.
I think there was like physical abuse with the other couple. I can't remember their names. Like Huntington's friend and I don't remember their names.
Mildred.
Maybe it's Millicent. Maybe I messed up her name. It's a Mill.
Yeah, Millicent and Walter Hargrave. No?
Yeah.
Maybe. That sounds right.
Yeah, Walter Hargrave.
Or was that brother.
Oh no, Hargrave is Millicent's maiden name. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Walter's her brother.
I think I have the tab open still. Hold
Yeah,
on. I have all my
I have the
research.
Wikipedia open. Walter Hargrave is friend.
Mill's brother.
No,
I'm just gonna call her
wrong.
Mill because I keep.
It's Millicent Hargrave, and so Walter Hargrave is the nice guy.
Yes.
Yeah, we're gonna get to nice guy in a minute.
Yeah.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
Ugh.
What's his name?
Why is his the name isn't?
I know. Are you kidding me?
She married to Ralph Hattersley.
Hattersley. They're all H's.
The problem is like 3 of the main guys have H last names.
I know.
Yeah, there was physical abuse with them though. Like at one point he was like pulling her hair and like, but like for Helen, they did a really good job of saying like the physical abuse isn't there, but it's always over her head.
Yes.
But,
yeah.
Yeah, it's heavy. But I'm so glad she wrote about it because, I mean, truly, it just, it's kind of like mind-boggling, kind of like you said earlier, that, you know, reviewers at the time were like, oh, this is despicable. How could you write this in a book? It's like, this happens. This happens all the time. This is real life she's writing about.
Yeah.
Helen's here.
And it kind of makes me wonder if some of the people who were saying that were like, this is how I treat my wife. What do you mean it's bad?
How dare you?
Yeah, or like alternatively that like they didn't want to know that this was how things went. It's like they're not going to change their behavior. It's like why are you looking under this rock that we all agreed to ignore? And Brontë like
Since we're kind of already on this topic, one thing I had jotted down, it's not a question, but I kind of wanted to compare and contrast Helen and Millicent's marriages, because we have like kind of the more outspoken wife trying to better her husband and the more passive one who's like, I hope my husband gets better. And I just think it's interesting the way things pan out for both of them. So tell me your thoughts. Sorry, it's not a question, so I know it's hard to start formulating words.
Oh, I just like sometimes throw sentences at you guys too, so it's fine. Taylor, do you want to go or do you want me to?
You can go first. I'm still formulating my thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, so like I think that comparison is like a very important part of the book. Like I think Aunt Brontë did a good job of like kind of matching those up and being like, draw some conclusions. I like one thing that I hate about the way that Millicent's relationship goes. I'm glad that her husband does eventually get better, but like I hate the part, and he says this a few times, where he's like, well, if she wasn't so scared of me, I wouldn't like hit her so much. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so talk about red flags.
What's that mean? That's like, are you sure about that?
Yeah, like I did think it was interesting that even Helen was a little bit like, well, Millicent, like maybe if you said something like that would help. I don't feel like it ventured too far into like victim blaming territory, but I do think it was interesting that Helen, kind of from being on the outside, could be like, your husband is not as bad as mine, and I feel like you could do something about this, but also like she talked to him directly too and was like, you're making her unhappy. And he's like, no, she never says anything. And she's like, look at these letters. Like she's so sad. Like
pulls out the receipts.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, exactly. Which I'm really glad that Helen did that. She wasn't like, oh, I can't share her private letters. She's like, stop abusing my friend. Yeah. So Julia, in exchange for your non-question, I didn't really give you an answer either. I just kind of like talked about it.
Thank you for unpacking that for us.
Yeah, I will say the endings, I guess, also fit for the characters as well. Like, I don't think Millicent would have pulled a Helen at all. Like, she didn't seem like the type to like up and leave. But I guess I'm happy that her husband reformed.
I know.
I still think she could do better, but it is 18 whatever, so
yeah,
we'll take what we can get. Jane Austen, at least they're not cousins, so
There you go.
The bar is on the ground.
The bar is in hell. And she reformed a little, so I guess she's making the best out of a bad situation. But Helen, I think, has always been just a little bit more strong-willed, even like you see that from her past, where she's very much about following her own path and not always listening to authority. And I do like that she sort of draws from that, like, I guess, sort of spirit and defiance from when she was younger to like get like the courage to leave him.
Yeah. And I do think the book did a good job too of like, even though Helen is a very strong-willed character, it's like you can have a strong personality and still be a victim of abuse. Like, because we're like in her head the whole time, and there's so many parts where she like rationalizes what her husband is doing to her. And I thought that was, I mean, it was like obviously very painful to read, but I think that was a really well done aspect of the book, is like Helen is so like, sassy and like strong and like strong-willed and independent, but she still, like, this still happened to her and it wasn't her fault. And like I think especially for like being such an old book, I'm like very impressed by the fact that it didn't play into like, oh well, if you just have a strong personality, like you'll be safe. Like that doesn't
just
happen.
Sass your husband out of it. No.
Right. Like that's just, and I was actually like, since we're in spoiler territory now, I was so upset when she went back to him. Like, I'm like, listen, I know he's dying. Don't go back. And actually that almost made me drop my rating of the book a little bit, because I felt like this went against like so much of what had happened up until then. But the reason I didn't is because like, I think in the context of the book, it made sense, because like he died right after that. So there was like no harm done. And she also made him sign that she had permission to take her son back and like leave whenever she wanted, which I think was really smart. So anyway, that's kind of like off topic, I guess, to what we were talking about, but like that really stressed me out. And I wish wish that hadn't happened, but like, because it turned out okay in the context of this particular story, I'm like, okay, I guess that's fine. Another book, I would not have been okay with this. Like going back to him being shown as like the moral thing to do. But yeah.
I guess that's also like moral for the time, because Helen is also very strong in her faith. And like back then that would have happened. But when I heard that, or like when I got to the part when it was revealed that Arthur had an accident, I was like, oh no, Arthur had a little accident. Oh, I hope he's okay.
The world's smallest violin for you, Arthur.
And when it's like talking about how he's getting better, and I'm like, oh no. And then he like has a relapse because he's an idiot, and he's like, I'm gonna ignore everything the doctors tell me. And I'm like, oh okay, I feel some relief now. Like
he's like, I'll have this whole bottle of wine, thanks, that'll cure me. And it's like,
I know, I'm like, okay, sure? You're just removing yourself from the problem. Like
I did love this sort of scene where she was negotiating with him about seeing her son. Like I thought that was really good, and the fact that he was like, well, I can't sign it, and she's like, well, we'll come back when you feel better, or when you can sign it. And he's like, oh, I can't read it. Like, okay, well,
I'll read it to you, don't worry.
When he was like, I'm too sick to like hold a pen. She's
I'm
like,
so weak. It was a very clever bargaining chip to be like, oh, you want to see your son? You just want to see him? Yeah, you can let me know that he's mine forever and you're not allowed to touch him. Thanks. Then you can see your son.
I think the fact that happened so early in the scene where she went back, that like kind of put my fears at rest a little bit. Like, okay, she's not just going to go back to like how things were. She's like, I have power over you, and you're going to stop mistreating me.
Yeah, I think it's very much in the vein of like forgive but not forget kind of a thing. Like Helen is a good Christian woman, so she's like, God will forgive you. I'm going to forgive you, whatever. But don't think for a second that I'm okay with anything you've done, because I'm not.
Yeah.
Which I respect.
Yeah, especially for the time period, again, like to have that difference of like, I like in the spirit of forgiveness, and like I do hope that like she genuinely hoped up until the end that he would like repent and like stop doing these bad things and all of that. But the fact that didn't lead her to be like, well, it's my duty to let him treat me however he wants, like because of forgiveness. Like I was very impressed that she she didn't interpret it that way.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm looking at my questions because I feel like I wrote them in a crazy order. Do we want to stay on characters a little bit longer? I think let's stay with characters. Which one do I want to touch on first? Okay, because we haven't spoken about him much, let's talk about everyone's favorite nice guy, Walter Hargrave, because I was so impressed. Like, I feel like the way she wrote him was so modern, and it like really astounded me. So again, share your thoughts. There's not a question here.
Would you like to go, Kara?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I feel like I've been talking a lot. So.
Oh, I feel like I've been talking a lot. So.
Good. If we all feel like that, it probably means we're all okay. But yeah, like Julia, exactly like you said, I was so impressed at how much of a modern, like, nice guy you owe having sex with me because I like treated you like a person. He felt, and I was also like, I was so impressed that I could not pinpoint him from the very beginning. I wasn't sure. I like there were some things where I was like, ooh, like this is like a little bit sketchy, or like I don't love how this is going down, but maybe I'm just interpreting it a certain way. And there was also the fact that, like, compared to how her husband was treating her, I was like, maybe he does actually like care about her. So like just A+ and Brontë for fooling me like a little bit.
And it's Millicent's brother, and I'm like, Millicent's so nice, she couldn't be wrong, right? Like,
yeah.
And I was like trying to figure out. I was like, okay, so I don't think we got any indication that Helen like was in love with someone else when she showed up here. So I'm like, what's gonna happen with this? I was like, is he actually like in love with her, or like does like something, like do they leave together and then they break up or something? Like what happens with this? So like, yeah, like I mean, even though I had some suspicions throughout, like until he like did that final like confrontation and like was like, you owe having an affair with me because I'm nice to you. Let's like run away together. No one's gonna believe that you didn't leave with someone anyway. So really, just take me with you. Like up until that point, I was still kind of unsure about him. So like, just a really well constructed character.
Yeah, that, like you two said, I was surprised by how modern he felt. This whole girls never go for the nice gentleman vibe. But I honestly thought he was going to be like a love interest or like a friend, or he was going to like help her escape or something. You know, he was so fond of her kid and all of this stuff. And it's honestly just so disappointing, and it feels like such a punch in the gut when it's revealed that he's really only interested in her romantically. Like he doesn't view her as like basically another person or even a friend. Like he just wants to like have sex with her or something. Like, I don't know. It's just so frustrating, and I feel so bad for her because he felt like, other than her two female friends who are like great, but like he's a friend who also has some sort of power in a patriarchal world. It's like, oh, he's going to be on her side this whole time, and he's, at the end of the day, he's not.
Yeah, and like the fact that we saw like he was kind of like standing up for her throughout, or he would kind of, but like the way it was described, there was always that little bit of like, oh, he's being kind of like performative about the way that he's like making sure that she sees him as like the one who's like protecting her. Like, yeah, it was so interesting. And Taylor, like you said, it was just like, it was kind of heartbreaking when we found out. It's like, you suck too, damn it. Like, like poor Helen doesn't catch a break. And I think that's why, like, well, one of the reasons it was like such an intense feeling of relief when the second time that she like plans to get away, when she like asks her brother to come see her, and she's like, you know, I don't think he really knows what's going on. I don't know if he's going to believe me. And he's like, yes, like, let's get you out. Like, I'll make like a house, like a safe house for you. And I'm just like, it's like the little things, you know, of like helping your sister escape an abusive marriage. Like
the little things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I had a theory going for a while, like midway through the novel. I was like, maybe Walter like lies and like changes his name and like he's Mr. Lawrence and that's why he's so nice to her and like clingy about her is because he's like, I still love her.
Yeah.
But I'm glad it's not because wow. But yeah, he really is like, that's just such, I'm glad this has never happened to me in my life, but I assume that can only be like the biggest punch in the gut to have someone you think is like your friend. And he's like, oh, no, I'm only nice because I'm hoping you're going to fall in love with me. And if that's not happening, why am I here? It's like, are you kidding me? Like, that's terrible.
Especially
but go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Julie. I just like totally interrupted
No,
you.
I'm not going to forget. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, especially because the way that Walter's behaving, he clearly knows what's going on. So he knows what Helen is having to deal with. And he's still like, well, if there's nothing in it for me, why would I care about what happens to you? And I'm like, oh, it's
and
awful.
Part of it, I think, is also like, you know, he's also a nice guy in that his friends are all jerks. They're all awful. He knows it. And he's still friends with them, I guess, because they've been friends for so long. But he only really calls them out when Helen's around or if there's something in it for him. And it's also just so true to life because you know those people who are like, oh, I'm not sexist, but I have all of my dude bro friends.
Yeah. And like they use the same excuse of like, well, we've been friends since we were kids. And it's like, get some new friends. Like,
yeah. You're a
better
man.
friends.
You can make some new ones.
Yeah.
You're like Victorian frat boys.
Yeah.
They
truly are.
They are.
I really love, though, again, just coming back to Helen, love her so much, that she was even in this like terrible position where she's kind of reliant on others to help her escape this situation. She still says to Hargrave, she's like, so listen, you can either like say you don't love me and that you know are like cutting ties essentially, or I don't even know how she phrased it now, but it's like, you know, this is someone who could help her and she's like, listen, unless you're going to drop this whole romance thing, I don't want your help. And like, what strength of character to do that? Because wow.
And I think that shows too like how much she's grown and changed because she's suspicious of him now when she maybe wouldn't have been before. And so I think possibly in addition to like her deciding the price was too high to pay, like even if he was like genuinely willing to help her, it's like I'm not willing to like feel like I owe this to you, even if you are a nice person. Like even separate from that, I feel like that might be an indication that like she's like suspected this of him all along, and so she's like, I know that like I know this kind of person now, and so if you're not willing to let this go, it shows you're not actually willing to help me, you know?
Yeah. Kind of on a similar topic, but I wanted to compare Gilbert and Walter because initially it seems like they have a lot of similarities. Like they're both gung-ho for Helen right away. You know, they're both very passionate about their feelings. Take a chill pill, fellas. But in the end, I found that I liked Gilbert and I did not like Walter. So I guess what kind of distinctions stand out for you ladies and how would you sort of compare their characters? I don't know. Again, not a real question, just a thought.
It counts.
I would say that I still am not a huge fan of Gilbert, but I think part of that is that I'm not a huge fan of the framing device. And like I said, the middle was my favorite part. So the parts that are mostly Gilbert narrated, I'm like, oh my God, get to the story. So it's not entirely his fault. It's just me being impatient. But I will say one of the biggest things that I noticed about Gilbert is that he's at least willing to learn and apologize for his mistakes. Like I didn't like him when he saw Helen walking around with Lawrence or something. And he was like, well, time to throw down.
He really did.
It's embarrassing. And so he does learn after a while, like maybe I should take a couple of steps and like chill out just a little bit.
Ask a question. Like,
maybe we should ask questions. Maybe I shouldn't get this jealous over someone. So there is this sort of capacity to learn, which I guess shows that his intentions are more virtuous or like true towards Helen. Yeah, that's kind of what I noticed compared to Walter, who clearly just has a goal from the beginning.
Yeah. I think also like Gilbert being he's like written as like this very like young and like a little bit hot-headed kind of character, and so it doesn't feel like, even though he does overreact and like, yeah, your instinct should not be to like punch someone out before you know what's happening. So there's like, it's definitely, he's got some work to do. But I feel like it's a little more, his impatience is a little more benign feeling to me than Hargrave's like manipulation. And I think also the fact that Gilbert did not know what was happening to Helen, like what her backstory was when he was acting this way. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, once he learned that, he was like, oh my God, I know why you reacted to me this way. Sorry. Like, that's a lot. Whereas like Hargrave like knew the whole time what was happening, and he was still like holding his assistants hostage if she didn't like promise to love him. Yeah. I thought it was really interesting, Taylor, that you really loved the middle, because my favorite parts were the beginning and the end. Like I really liked the like just hanging out in the village part and like, ooh, who's Helen? Like what's going on here? And
let's go to the cliffs and paint for a while.
Yeah. And just like getting to know the other characters. Like I really liked Rose. She was not in the book very much, but I had a great time whenever she was around. So I just liked the like, I don't know, the like English village and like Jane Austen-esque like humor and everything in the beginning. And then like the middle was obviously very intense, and I think it was done really well. But I also think it maybe was a little longer than it had to be. Like, I don't know. Like I got to the point where I was like checking how many pages there were before she would escape, because I'm like, this is too stressful. Like, even though I know that she and Arthur are like, baby Arthur are like okay, this is too much. I'm like, this is just stressing me out.
There's a lot of highs and lows in the middle.
Yeah. Like when, oh my God, when he found out that she was like, when he read her diary and he found out that like she was planning to get away. Oh my God. Like,
yeah.
And he like destroys all the art supplies. I was like, ah,
I know.
Yeah. The whole thing is like so stressful. It reads like a Reddit relationships post that's like way too long.
Yeah.
I liked it, and it was interesting, and I think the thing is, like, because I knew, like, even when she didn't know what was going on, I could pick up on what was going on. Like when Arthur is like in the garden and she runs up and hugs him from behind, and he's like, oh hello my darling, and he turns around and he's like, oh gross. And she doesn't realize what's happening, and I'm like, girl,
I didn't even realize what was happening in that moment.
Oh, I did. I was like, he's having an affair and it's probably that bitch. Like,
I was like, what a weird reaction to your wife. Oh well, like I was just right there with Helen.
I read Reddit too much. I know what's up. I'm like, cheater. Girl.
Yeah. Speaking of the whole affair, I've got this like running theory that I don't have fully fleshed out. Maybe you guys can help me. I feel like Helen and Lord Loughborough, I said Loughborough the whole time, so I might say it like that. I feel like they're kind of character foils, because we've got this like, I want to marry for love, I need to marry for money thing. We've got like Helen's piety versus his penchant for vice. And then obviously they both have just the worst marriages in the world. But then like things end up okay for both of them in these like different opposite ways. So I don't know if anyone wants to flesh that out with me, but that's been on my brain a lot.
I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Taylor.
No, I was just going to say, like, they are pretty good at being parallels. I think the biggest difference is that Lord Loughborough can, because he is a man in a patriarchal society, it's so much easier for him to leave that relationship. Like, both, what's her name? Arabella? His wife? Yeah, Arabella and Arthur Huntington are both committing the same sort of, like, they're both having an affair, but it's so much easier, I think, for him to get a divorce and get the children. You know, he has the power in that relationship. Whereas with Helen, the things are a little bit more at stake because, you know, she and the child are her husband's property. She can't just leave, even though he's having an affair.
Taylor, I hadn't even thought about those things like next to each other, but that is such a good point. That's such a good point. Like, because we even like when they're saying like the aftermath of like when he finally like knows that his wife is having an affair, it's like, oh yeah, then he like they separated, he moved to London and like
Yeah.
he's there now. Whereas like poor Helen has to like go through this like midnight escape to like rescue her child from her abusive and herself from her abusive like relationship. That's like such a good point. I didn't think about those things like right next to each other, but I'm sure that was intentional.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that out loud, because I feel like you've really just cemented my theory.
Yeah,
That's the point. Gender inequality, yes.
And yeah, Julia, like I think too, like they get in answer to your like question / theory, Lord Lowborough, or I don't remember how I was saying it now, but he and Helen, I do feel like they kind of have this like understanding of each other because they're in such similar situations, even though it's a lot easier for the man to leave that situation. Like they do understand what each other is going through to an extent. And I feel like you kind of see that even early on in the diary section where like they're coming, I think Lowborough and Arabella are coming to stay for the first time maybe. And like at first Helen understandably is like not a fan of his because he was like one of her husband's like asshole friends.
Yeah.
But like as time goes on, she like realizes that he's working really hard to like stay sober and to like not do any of this anymore. And I feel like she's one of the only people who is like, hey, can you maybe at least not have an affair like in front of him? Like,
maybe.
just maybe like hold it in for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
They are being very subtle about this whole affair thing.
They're so bad at it. Like,
no, yeah.
That's why I was like kind of like not that any of this is Helen's fault. That's not what I mean. But I was kind of frustrated when she's like, it's really weird that he didn't want to see me. And I was like, Arabella sucks and they flirted before and she's staying in your house. Like
when you walked in on him kissing like Arabella's hand or something, and she's like, huh, that's weird. A little weird.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I guess that's like an indication though of how deeply invested she was in like this lie that like she was fine and that her marriage was okay. But
yeah. Trying to make it work so you make yourself like ignore a lot of these red flags. Yeah. Including running up and hugging someone and him think, oh, hello, it's you, gorgeous. And then he's like, oh, God.
Yeah.
Get away from me.
Sorry, I'm plugging my laptop in. I thought it was, and then my screen dimmed, and I was like, oh, you're not. Okay. Thank you, guys. You really just put the icing on the cake of my little parallel thing I was going for in my mind. Also, maybe this is just me. I was a little bit like, if those two want to be together, I would not be mad about it. Because, like, he's really trying to be sober. Helen's all for that. Like, I feel like they could make it work. They could raise their kids collectively. Like, I feel like it would have been nice.
Yeah. No, that occurred to me, too. I was like, I wouldn't be mad at it. Like, I think we're clearly like setting up her and Gilbert to be a thing. I was like, but it's an option.
Yeah. It's a good plan B.
Yeah. Right?
So I have some writing questions for you guys because both of them, they've actually already been kind of hinted at naturally by you two. So thank you. You're so on top of it.
We're just that good.
First of all, we have our lovely framing device, which, by the way, I did learn actually like is a thing about Gothic novels. Like, so that's the one thing Anne did to be like, yeah, I'll write a Gothic novel too. Here's a framing device. Like,
I'll give you two. She did the one. Better at everything.
But how do you feel about this being an epistolary novel? And why do you think Anne chose letters and diary entries as the means of telling the story? I don't know the answer. I just want to know your theories.
Would you like to go first, Kara?
Sure. I think so I'm also thinking of like why I think it worked for me because this one I could feel it was like unnecessary in some places, but for one thing, it was a huge relief to know, like we've talked about, to know that Helen and baby Arthur got out okay, because I would not have like that would have been rough if we didn't know how things were going to go. Like, full disclosure, I might have spoiled myself so I could continue reading, because it was like so stressful, even knowing they were going to be okay. So I wonder if part of it was like intended to reassure you, but I'm wondering if like another reason that she has, because like in a way Helen feels like the main character, even though it's technically Gilbert. I wonder if she was like, especially because she published this under like a male alias, like all the Bronte sisters did. I wonder if she was like, I'm gonna lead them in with a man writing a letter to his man friend, and then I'm gonna hit them with the feminism, and they won't know what's going on. I wonder if that's why.
I would love that.
I mean, it could happen. And I also think like having. No, sorry, go ahead, Taylor. What?
No, I was just saying it's like a Looney Tunes trap where you've got like a candy bar and a box and a stick, and Anne Bronte's just got a string.
Yeah.
Sorry,
but the candy bar says like
you
men.
Like,
no,
and then the box says feminism.
Feminism, yeah. I love that image so much. Yeah, but like I also wonder if like part of having like Gilbert writing as an older man, like to a friend of his, I think one thing it does, I don't know if this is intentional, but one thing it does is like kind of like build interest in the sense that you're like, oh wait, so if we think he's going to end up with Helen, has he like mentioned being married? Like, what are the clues in like his previous letters? And like you kind of couldn't really pick up on what was going on, so like that was kind of like a mystery element almost. But another big thing that I think it does, which is one of the reasons that I liked Gilbert more than I thought, is that it gives him some self-awareness that he most certainly did not have as a youngin'. And I feel like that was like a really positive thing for the novel for me, is like with him being a much older man writing to somebody else, he could kind of like, even when he was being a young, dumb, hot-headed kid, he was kind of like, yeah, I know this was dumb. Like, and I feel like that helped for me personally. And I wonder if that was one of the things Anne Bronte was trying to do, is like make him a less annoying character by being like, he's learned a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it is like a very interesting narrative choice to have like two frame narratives.
Yeah. So first of all, I can't remember if I'm thinking of this wrong. Is this supposed to be one long letter, or is it multiple letters?
I think, okay, I could not figure it out, and so I'm picturing like somebody writing their friend and being like, did you want to hear about like my life?
I'm just imagining getting
had dates at the beginning. I think it's multiple letters.
Okay. Can you imagine getting this 500-page letter from your friend gossiping about your wife or about their wife? Like, listen, I love gossip just as much as the next person, but you could have shortened it to like 2 pages.
Yeah, it made me think about how during our Wuthering Heights live show, like, Taylor, I don't remember if it was you or Julia who mentioned it, but you're like, imagine asking somebody like, what's up with that family on the hill? And they're like, like, I wanted like a 2 sentences answer, and you gave me all this. Maybe it was someone in the comments. I don't remember.
I feel like maybe I said it. It sounds like the sort of stupid joke I would make during one of these.
I feel like it sounds very much like what we were talking about.
Yeah.
I will say one of the things I did like about the framing device is that you do have this sort of mystery about like, why is this woman buying this sort of fixer-upper? Yeah. Who is this kid that she has? And it allows you to sort of make your own guesses about it, especially when there like gossip starts popping up. So like my first thought up until we get to like maybe a couple of like pages into the diary is that young Arthur was like her illegitimate child, and that what's his name? Her brother, the Lawrence guy.
Mr.
Lawrence.
Mr. Lawrence was like the baby daddy. This is me creating drama.
What all the town thought, huh? You believe that?
Yes, because I will create a drama narrative if no one will tell me the truth. And so like he was like the baby daddy. And so then when the diary started and it was like Arthur Huntington, I'm like, oh, that's the baby daddy. And
I
technically
know.
he is, but there was a wedding and a whole marriage thing to go along with it.
The
But I
first
thought
time he told us his first name, Arthur, like Mr. instead of being Mr. Huntington, when it was Arthur, I was like, it's him. Like,
yeah, I thought it was going to be like a sort of Tess of the D'Urbervilles situation, or maybe more consensual. Like because I knew there was like a feminist narrative, and I was like, I don't know, maybe she's like out there living her best life, and people don't like that.
I also think like the framing it in letters from like a character who's kind of not the main character. Like Gilbert's almost like a decoy protagonist.
Yeah.
Or I guess like him and Helen, depending on the part of the book, they're kind of like equal protagonists. But I also feel like it kind of almost let him be like an omniscient narrator while at the same time not. It's like he could give you backstory on characters that like Helen wouldn't have known about, because like if it had just been her diary, we would not have known the environment she was moving into. And then Taylor, like you said, it kind of creates this like built-in mystery of like, we're here in the village and like this like random widow shows up and it's like, oh, what's going on with her?
Yeah. Just another thing, like, does Helen give Gilbert the entire diary to read in the night?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She handed him like the whole diary. But there's pages torn out of the back, and he's like, oh, that's probably because she didn't want me to read what she wrote about me.
Yeah. And then it's funny because like I think doesn't he like assume it's like, oh, it's because she likes me, and then he's like, wait, no, she hated me at first. It's like 3 pages of like Gilbert is such a jackass. Like
You won't believe this. This guy said to me that I can raise my son. Like all around.
I also like the idea of Helen like giving Gilbert her huge diary and then just sitting there and watching him read it. Just
I think he took it home.
Yeah, he took it home.
Okay, he took it home. I was, for some reason in my mind, I was like, they were in her like parlor or living room, and she's just sitting there while he reads the whole thing.
Oh my gosh! Imagine her just stoically. Yes, keep reading the whole time. Wow.
Yeah.
Would have been something else. Did I have anything else to say about that? No. Oh, one thing that I read, this is not my own idea, so don't give me credit, but I was like, that is so interesting. In the use of the framing device was that like the man is giving like the societal external point of view of like, this is the town, this is what we're like. And then the female narrative is like the internal domestic, like real stuff. And I was like, whoa, that's really cool. So
yeah.
Again, I read that. That's not my own brain.
That's really interesting though.
Yeah. And like especially how that relates to the themes of the novel as like what's going on behind closed doors and everything. Like that's really interesting that like the first part you get is like the village and like she's probably a slut, like, and then you get like what actually happened. It's like actually domestic violence. Like,
yeah. Also, I feel like they use the word slut in this book, and I did not know that was a word used.
Yeah, I think so.
Like, they used it in Wuthering Heights too, and I was like, oh, I imagine that. Like, they definitely did not use that word.
Yeah.
No, Heathcliff definitely said that.
About wasn't it about his child's mother?
Yeah. He was like, oh, your mom, she was a slut. Anyways, like
what? An absolute clown.
Yeah.
To be fair, when I was guessing that Helen was a slut, I was like, yes, girl. Queen. So mine was more of a uplifting.
Yeah, it was a positive spin.
It was a positive spin.
Here. This is the last question I wrote. This is not the one I meant to end on. But again, it's writing focused and it's something we've touched on a little bit. To me personally, this felt much more like reading an Austen novel than like a Brontë novel in comparison to her sister's works. So what kind of factors do you guys think attributed to this? And do you even agree with what I'm saying?
It's a good question.
Because one thing, if you want to ponder, I can lead us in. I think one thing is just the whole beginning of like, oh, this is the village, and oh, someone new is in town.
Yes.
Like it's very Pride and Prejudice. Like, oh, what's their deal? Let's go find out. And initially, there is like a lot of comedy in the book,
Yeah.
even though it gets very dramatic later. But I don't want to
Yeah.
take any more potential thoughts, so I'll stop there.
I will say this also reads as if sort of like, I guess, you know how Jane Austen usually has that one character who's very like impetuous and they sort of get punished by being saddled with someone like really bad. It sort of feels like a sort of Sense and Sensibility fanfic. Like, what if Marianne and Willoughby did get together? Or like a Pride and Prejudice fanfic. Like, what about Lydia and Wickham? Like, what would that relationship be like? So I guess like maybe Anne Bronte was writing fan fiction.
Yeah. That's kind of a really good thought, actually.
Yeah.
But it doesn't expand on those like bad or punishments that happen in her Austen's books.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like agree, Julia. Like the beginning felt very Austen-esque to me, and like the best way. Like it was like very similar kind of like humor, and like the banter between Gilbert and Helen was also very like it felt like very clever, like Austen kind of dialogue. And like you said, just like the whole setup of like, ooh, we're in a village and like a mysterious person moves in. Let's gossip about them. And I feel like the middle part of the novel, even though it's much more like, it's much less like Austen in like plot, because like generally Austen, like even though she included things about like serious social issues, it wasn't like front and center, like you're here watching it.
Yeah.
But I do feel like the thematic focus was like kind of similar, whereas I don't feel like that with Wuthering Heights or Jane Eyre. I feel like themes wise they're very different, and like I don't think that that either of those novels have as much social commentary as Jane Austen's does. Like personally, I think that with Jane Eyre there's a little bit of class discussion, which is a little bit inconsistent, which we kind of talked about last time. And then with Wuthering Heights, I get like there's like a little bit of like, I don't know, people being able to grow and change, and like nature versus nurture, which we talked about. So like it's not that they don't do anything with like social commentary, but like the focus of this one felt much more to me like an Austen novel, just like really going in on like the treatment of women and like power dynamics and like marriages in this time period being like a really not great situation for a lot of women. So yeah, like even though like the fact that we're sitting down and like seeing all of it is very different from Austen, I feel like themes wise they're much more similar than I initially thought. Like, because Julia, before you asked this question, I was kind of thinking like, oh, it's just the beginning of the book and kind of the end with like the misunderstanding and like then the marriage and everything.
Oh, but we get married.
Yeah, but like actually like I kind of think even the middle is like sort of in that vein. So
yeah,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I have a page saved, so you're good.
I was also going to say, I feel like Tenant and Jane Austen's books have the similar theme of like, yes, it's important to marry for love, but also like you have to use your head too and think about what other people are saying, and like, you know, what does your brain also say? Like, does this person give you vibes?
Yeah, what do you actually know about this person other than I love him, Daddy? Like, okay, Ariel. Yeah.
Which even Pride and Prejudice, which like is one of the more like ostensibly romantic of her books, it's like even that one, it's like, yeah, Lizzie doesn't give him the time of day until he starts being a nicer person with no expectation that she's gonna like him. Like he starts changing. Yeah, right, exactly. Like he starts changing, like even thinking like, well, she's not gonna take me back, but she's right. I need to be better.
One of the things, especially that made me think of Austen is, and like you said, it's in the middle. It's not even in the beginning or the end. So in the scene, so Helen is confronting Arthur, being like, well, like you can't just flirt with her, even if like your intention is to make me jealous. Like that's not okay. Like, what would you do if her husband was flirting with me? And he's like, oh, I would blow his brains out, obviously.
Yeah, like.
So there's a quote. Actually, they quote Shakespeare. So Love it. But it totally made me think of Persuasion, because Arthur says, the cases are different. It is a woman's nature to be constant, to love one and one only, blindly, tenderly, and forever. Bless them, dear creatures, and you above them all. But you must have some commiseration for us, Helen. You must give us a little more license. And then he like quotes Shakespeare. And so she's like, okay, so like you can just say that women are constant no matter what, even if you like kick us, like, you know, like it's just, it was such a blatant point where they're arguing like, oh, but everyone says this, so this must be true about women. And I was like, wow, she said it.
Yeah.
I do like the comparison to Persuasion and about the constancy of women. That's a good point.
Yeah,
Like,
I was thinking about that too, and I was also thinking about like one of the things that struck me that like we talked about for Persuasion, I think, was like how there's parts of it that are like almost more blatantly feminist than Pride and Prejudice, because like there's that conversation when they're talking about the constancy of women, and Captain Harville is like, oh, I could mention books, but you'll probably say they're all written by men. And Anne's like, yeah. She's like, men have had, what does she say? Like, men have had every advantage of us in telling their own stories. Education has been theirs in so much higher a degree. The pen has been in their hand. Like, just like all these sentences, one after the other, of her being like, you have more access than us. Like, you're in charge of the narrative. I'm not going to let that prove anything. And that's kind of how I feel about Tenant of Wildfell Hall, is like Anne Brontë is blatantly like sexism. Like it makes things different, which apparently was too much for the reviewers.
Yeah. I'm just reading Mary Margaret's comments right now. I'm catching up on those. Yeah, I was not there for your Sense and Sensibility live show, but to me, Willoughby is one of the more sympathetic of Austen's rogue characters. He writes the letter. He's like, hey, sorry, I was so rude.
My bad.
I hate that letter. I hate that letter.
I'm like, oh wow, at least you have like a degree of awareness, whereas Wickham's just like, and then we got married. Hey,
yeah,
I'm gonna come
that's really interesting, because like Willoughby, I think, is the worst of them all.
Oh, I hate Willoughby.
I want him to get hit by a bus. Like, I just
Willoughby more than
I
Wickham.
loathe that man.
I like
Because the reason is like he is like, when he's apologizing about what he did to Marianne, he's like, well, yeah, everyone's mad at me because I impregnated a 15-year-old girl, but if she wasn't stupid, it wouldn't have happened. Like, and how was like I supposed to know that she wanted to get in contact with me? She was stupid, so she could have found me and I would have helped her. And I'm like, how? Like this.
I always talk about this with my sister, and we're like, we would key Willoughby's carriage.
Yeah.
Oh, he's awful.
Like even when he's apologizing, he's like, I'm so sad because nobody loves me anymore. And I'm like, maybe because you're a rapist and you victim blame. Like, he's talking, like, he actually says, he's like, oh yeah, everybody gets mad that I did that, but because I was a libertine, she must have been a saint. So like, she had it coming because she was a bad 15-year-old girl. Like,
oh, awful. Awful. I'm going to put Arthur Huntington in the same like category of literary men I would fight. It's on site for those two.
Yeah.
For real. Yeah. If Arthur Huntington shows up anywhere near me on his horseback, I'm going to be making like Gilbert. He really let him have it, you guys.
Yeah.
I still can't believe that scene was real. I was like, is this happening?
It's so embarrassing when he finds out that he's Helen's. Ooh.
And he like left her there.
Yeah, which, not that it was okay before, because like we knew that Lawrence was probably not that bad. Like, something was clearly going on here. But like after we find out who he is, it's like, Gilbert, you left him for dead. Like, he's like, when he goes to apologize, and he's like, sorry for like punching you out in the street and then just like leaving you there. In my defense, I thought you were cheating.
It's like an "Am I the asshole?" post on Reddit. Am I the asshole for punching my girlfriend's brother because I thought he was her boyfriend?
Yeah. It's not my fault he didn't tell me he wasn't her baby daddy. Sorry. Like, oh.
Right. He's like, full disclosure would have been nice, but he's like, this is why you got to be honest. So like, I don't go around punching your brother. Like,
he just chose violence.
Yeah. I do feel like, to Gilbert's credit, though, if I'm remembering correctly, which I didn't finish this book that long ago. Like, it was only a week or so, but I feel like he does, like, after he reads the whole diary and he finds out what happens, he's like, not only does he apologize to Lawrence, but he also, I think he like indicates to Helen that like, oh, I understand why my behavior was like concerning for you, you know, like, because she had just been through this, and so she initially was like, oh, you're going to be another one, and like, at least as I recall, he's like, he kind of acknowledges that, which I really like, that he was like, oh yeah, you've been through this horrible thing, of course that would change how you think about men. Like,
yeah. Also, side note, shout out to Helen for being a MILF, because everywhere she goes, men are like, hey, I know you're married, but like, you're so beautiful, I think I'm in love with you. Like, good for you, girl. Like, you still got it.
MILF is so funny.
She is a MILF.
She is. Walter doesn't care. Gilbert's like, you've got a kid, I'm fine with that. Like, they really
Wildfell Hall.
Oh my gosh, we're republishing it. New title.
Take that, Charlotte.
Oh my god.
It's cursed.
I know I don't have any other questions written. I don't know if you guys had anything else you wanted to say. I mean, there's a lot of minor characters we didn't talk about because I was like, I don't know. I think it's weird. There's probably a huge age gap between Lawrence and Esther. Like, what's up with that?
Yeah.
I was trying to do the math on that one.
Like,
yeah. It's funny though, like when they were first, like, I think it was like a throwaway line of Helen thinking like, oh, it'd be nice if he found someone nicer. And I'm like, are you going to go for Esther? Is that what's going to happen here? And it was. I was like,
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That's all I got. Any last questions?
This book was a ride.
It really was.
It was. It's my favorite Brontë novel so far. So I'm really excited to read more. I want to read like The Professor, Agnes Grey, Villette. I want to read all of them.
I was like I was not sure, like the end of the book, when like when Helen just like leaves, I was genuinely not sure if like he and her were actually gonna like end up together, or if this was gonna be like and that's how I lost the love of my life kind of thing. I was genuinely like worried about that. Like, not so much the marriage thing, because I feel like that would have been very unlikely that she like just goes off to marry a random person instead of Gilbert.
Yeah.
But like I had no experience with Anne Brontë, and like based on other like the two other Brontë novels I've read, I was like, this could go either way. Stressful.
I will say part of me was kind of hoping she wouldn't end up with Gilbert, because I'm like, girl's been through so much. She needs to like take a break from men. And
she
just
did,
like
though.
She did, but I wanted her to take a longer break. Like, girl needs to go on a hiatus first. But
can I? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
This was like not really on topic, but I was just. Can I just say that like Gilbert, like knowing that he could ask her brother, and he was like, "No, that would be desperate." I'm like, this is relatable, but also infuriating. Like, yeah. And then I think Lawrence even tells him, he's like, "Yeah, why didn't you just talk to me?" And he's like, "Because I couldn't." Like, embarrassing, Lawrence.
And he's like, "No, I have nothing to say for your letter. Thank you." Okay.
Yeah. And he's like, "Idiot." I think that's one of the other reasons why I'm like a little fonder of Gilbert than I expected, is because like, yeah, he's like a dumb bitch sometimes, but like in relatable ways.
We all relate. Taylor, did you have more to that thought that you needed to finish? I don't know where we were.
I don't think I did. Or if I did, it wasn't going to be good.
Now I feel
I
like
don't know
was
what you're talking about. This is high quality analysis we're doing at the end here. Like MILF of Wildfell.
I feel like my parents are going to ask for money for my degree back. They were like, "Is this what you studied?"
This is not what we sent you to school for.
That's
Shoot. Oh, you know what I do want to say though? Like I knew when he heard the rumor and they're like, she's getting married. I was like, logically, no, she's not getting married. But at the same time, I was like, how would that rumor even get in the rumor mill? Like I've played many a game of telephone, and I don't know how Mr. Lawrence is marrying, Esther gets turned into Miss Hart. Like I just don't understand how that got messed up in the scheme of the rumor mill. It just seems
I do think like they set it up a little bit with like not just like the initial rumor of like Helen. Well, the rumor that no one would actually say, but they're like, "Did you hear about Helen?" And it's like, yeah. And it's like, okay, I'm not gonna tell you. We're just gonna not speak of it, but we all know what she did. So like they set it up with that, but also the rumor when Lawrence gets like punched out in a ditch by Gilbert, and then like by the time it gets through the rumor mill, it's like, yeah, he's like dead now.
Okay, true, valid points. This town loves.
But yeah, I also like once they got to the actual like marriage thing, I was like, okay, I don't think that's gonna happen, but I'm still a little worried that she's gonna have like moved on because it's better for both of them, even though they're both in love. Like,
why not make it a little more complicated? Sorry.
No, you're right, Taylor.
What'd you say, Taylor?
Oh, I just said, why not make it a little more complicated?
Yeah, it's like honestly, it's the ending of a Shakespeare comedy.
It is.
That's what it is. If with like rumors getting started, the wrong people getting married, random side characters who have barely interacted getting married, like that's what it is.
I love Gilbert showing up and being like, no, I can't. And he's like gonna bounce. And then Arthur's literally like, oh hey, it's our friend out there. Like
thank God for Arthur.
Him. Like, oy vey.
I think about that a lot. Like I don't like those kind of like near misses in books, even if they turn out okay, because I'm like, you realize that your future happiness was like one meaningless decision away from not happening. Like
I know.
Or one small decision, I should say. Yeah, Arthur at the MVP of that final scene there.
Really? All right. Well. Oh. YouTube rejected my comment. They think I'm spam. Sorry.
What? I see it on the comments.
Oh no, it is there. StreamYard says it's been rejected, and I'm like, okay, rude. But I never mind. That's all I've got. Any final words?
I think I'm good. I don't think I can top the MILF of Wildfell Hall. So
I don't think anyone.
All right. Well, Kara, you did mention briefly, but I'll say it again, that our December book is The Three Musketeers. So buckle up, friends. That's going to be a journey. I'm excited, though.
Me too.
And so, wait, have you both read it before?
I have not.
You have not. Okay, I haven't either. You did say it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I haven't seen the show or the movie or any related media, so I know virtually nothing.
I've seen the Mickey, Donald, and Goofy version.
I think like The Three Musketeers is a good one. Like at least based on my experience, I think it's good to go in not knowing much about the plot, because that's kind of part of the excitement is like the mystery and like, ooh, like what's going on with all of these like spies and affairs and like people running around fighting each other.
I think it sounds spicy. It'll be fun.
You had me at affairs, so we're good.
You had me at spies. All right, perfect. Well, I guess we'll just sign out. Oh, and it'll be on Taylor's channel.
Oh, yes.
I should say that.
Taylor's.
So look for us there next month. Okay. That's it. Thank you for those of you who joined in, and see you next month. Bye.
Bye.